This is Canada Reads American Style, featuring two friends who love Canada Reads and Canadian literature. Welcome our host Rebecca from Michigan and Tara from Ontario. Hi everyone, it is Rebecca and Tara, and today we have Book Chat 22, and I would like to announce, I didn't even ask you yet, Tara, but we have a little bit of snow on the ground. How about you?
No, nothing. It's gotten cold here, but we have no snow yet. You have snow? I didn't know that.
I woke up, opened the curtains, and you can still see the grass and everything, but there's a little light dusting of snow everywhere, and that made me happy because I wasn't expecting it.
Yeah.
So, what have you been up to?
Oh my. Not much. I was going to say, I have nothing prepared. Have I done anything interesting?
Just work,
I
right?
just work, and then relaxing and home stuff. And yeah, nothing. I feel
Yeah.
like I must have something to tell you, but I've got nothing. I'm sorry, people. Sorry.
No, it's okay because now's the time when your work starts to heat up and everything. So
Yeah.
you're not going to have any great kayaking stories for us
No,
anymore.
paddleboarding season has
Paddleboard, yeah.
ended. Yeah, paddleboarding season has ended. I'm just reading. Oh my God, that's it. I've got nothing. I sound so boring.
No, that's a good thing. So, well, we're just celebrating, this weekend is our Thanksgiving, and so,
Mhm.
uh, had made a little bit of food, not a lot, and, my mom and I had a nice quiet day yesterday, so, yeah,
Nice,
so we're ready to
nice.
go. Now, what are you currently reading, though?
Now, okay, so now this is when I become more interesting when we talk about the books that I'm reading. So I am,
Sorry, I
I'm
was coughing, sorry about that.
okay. So I am currently working through. So we released our Christmas episode, and I am full on this year, especially into my Christmas books. I think I need them, and I'm enjoying them. And I am currently very close to finishing Winter Solstice by Rosamunde Pilcher. So this book was published in 2005. And in 2024, there is still a waiting list from my library. I think there are like 6 people waiting for this because I only was able to get it for a 2-week time period. And I had to wait about a month for it once I put it. And this, I'm going to show Rebecca. People can't see it, and I don't know if she can tell, but my copy from the library is very well loved
Yep.
and worn. It is amazing how much this book is still, and I get it. I am loving
Wow.
this book. Yep. The same experience I had with The Shell Seekers, which I read in my early 20s, I am getting from this one. She creates this beautiful atmosphere. So it starts in England and we move to like very small town Scotland in the 2000s. So it's not that long ago, but 25 years ago, and very small town. So like they're living in these little cottages that are 200 years old. So it's
Oh, that's cool.
lovely. And how she's brought 5 characters together who at the beginning of the book are strangers, except for 2 are family members, but essentially brought 5 strangers together in a cottage in Scotland for Christmas. It's amazing how she's done this, because even when I started reading the book and you get the first 2 characters, I'm like, how is she? Wait, there's other people coming eventually. How is this going? Oh, it's just so good. I love it.
So this is a modern day story. I mean,
Yes.
2000.
Yeah.
But okay, for some reason I was assuming that it was like a historical story.
No, yeah, no, it's
Hmm.
modern day, but I think just because the setting is so rustic, you keep it has this vibe to it, and it's even I have this vibe, and like a boring aside, we are getting our water heater, something done with our water heater today or something, right? This afternoon, people are coming to look at it. And I just went to Mike, my husband, this morning to confirm the time, like the appointment, because he might be in meetings. I'm like, so when the boiler people come, and he's like, it's not. He's like, we don't have a water boiler. I'm like,
I
yeah,
don't
you
know
need a
what.
boiler, and he's like, no. It's like not 1910. We don't have a water boiler. I'm like, oh, you're right. I'm like, the water heater. He's like, no, it's not even that. I'm like, okay. I'm like, I'm good. I've got this.
I would have said the same thing. I don't know the difference between all that stuff.
No,
So
I
there you
don't either.
go.
But I'm like, they're still like doing all their stuff is in these little kitchens, and I love it. They're in these old cottages where one room is totally closed off and it's the dining room, another room, the kitchen's like in here with an old stove. It's fantastic. I'm loving this book.
Oh,
I may
that's
have to
cool.
buy a copy for
And
myself.
it is a chonker of a
It
book.
is. It's like just over 500 pages
Oh
and
my God.
small print. Like small print.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh,
But
that's
it's like so
amazing.
lovely. It goes, if you can get some like quality reading time, it flies pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And you're getting multiple, I'll put it out there, multiple POVs from all the different characters. So each character, at some point, you have chapters from their point of view. And it's kind of cool because you'll get two characters talking and they'll be like, oh, these other two characters are doing this. And then in the next chapter will be one of those other characters. And you get the same story, like what they're doing, gone to get the Christmas tree, but you're going to get what happened while they were getting the Christmas tree that the other two characters don't
Oh,
know.
yeah.
And then there is a teenager, she's, I think, 14 or 15, and her chapters are all diary entries. So her diary entries, which
Oh.
could be cheesy because, like I think Rosamund Pilcher was elderly when she wrote this, but she pulls it off, like getting I think the vernacular of a 2000 early 2000s teenage girl English, I think. Might
Yeah.
be a little
Yeah.
cheesy at times, but it's not bad. That
Yeah.
part.
Yeah.
Anyways, what about you? What are you currently reading?
So I am reading Lady Sings the Blues, which is Billie Holiday's memoir. And it's with William. Oh, I can't even see the name because it's covered up. So on my library edition here. But I decided I'm counting this as one of my classic women
Mhm.
authors because this book, it's the 50th anniversary of this book, the copy that I have, and I'm not even sure what year this was. I think it was 2006 or something. But this is a raw memoir. Like I said, I have never read a memoir yet that is this raw about who she is and how she lived her life, how she grew up. And I think I cannot even tell you how much I'm loving this
Oh,
book. Like and I'm not even that far into it, but I just she had a freaking hard life. And she eventually, I think becomes a heroin addict or something. I think that's kind of what's going on. But I know I'm fumbling over what I'm trying to say about it. And I obviously after I've read it, I'll do my review after I've completed it for our next book chat. But it is an amazing surprise of a book. I did not expect it quite like this. But because she just like no holds barred for her. She just says it how she means it, I'm sure. So anyway, that's what I'm currently reading. So I think getting started for what we have read, my list is longer. So I think I'm going to kind of
yeah.
go first. I had a lot because I was on my vacation. And then when I got back, I just kind of started to get a lot of my reading sort of caught up. But the first book I just want to mention is, again, this is my, because I practically went the whole year not reading my books of the 12 classic women authors. And so now I'm like hustling to get this goal done by the end of the year. So I did read The Optimist's Daughter by Eudora Welty, who was a Southern writer from Mississippi. And I will just say that I loved this book because you can hear that real Southern slow drawl, just because my family's from Northern Alabama, but I love how her Southern voice comes through in this story. And it's a woman, her father has passed, and her stepmother, who, she does not have a close relationship with her stepmother, but she comes back in and tries to go through this process of her father's death with his wife. And it's kind of this story of also recognizing who she thought her father was and who he really was, perhaps, because we all have a concept of who the people are in our lives, but other people have another perspective. So I kind of liked that. But I definitely want to read more Eudora Welty. And one of the things I did was, when I was young, I would watch the Dick Cavett show, and he would have all these great authors on. And I went back and found the interview that he did with her, which is how I learned about her the first time, was through his TV show. And I went back and watched that interview that he did with her, and just that calm Southern drawl, that just way of seeing the world. I just thought she was absolutely amazing person, and I'm so glad that I read this book. But I don't know if people have read her or if they're even interested, but I would recommend, if you're looking for a great classic female author, you can't go wrong with Eudora Welty.
When was that book published roughly? Do you know, Rebecca?
Boy, I that one, let me see if it says here.
Sorry to
No,
put you
that one
on
I'll
the
have to,
spot.
yeah, I'll have to look it up. I'll let you know in the after you've done your
Just
chat. But
curious.
I'm trying to think. Yeah, let me look that up because that I'm not sure.
Okay, I'm going to start off with a book that's going towards my reading goals for 2024 as well, and that
Ooh.
is The Frozen Thames by Helen Humphreys. So I can check off another book on my Helen Humphreys list. This was actually the first book of Humphreys that I'd ever read. So it was published back in 2008. And this was a reread. And it is a collection of short stories. Each short story is based upon a time during which the Thames River froze over. Obviously, the Thames in London. I love this book. I loved it as much this time as I did then. Like, that's what was my first exposure to her, and I'm annoyed that it took me this long to return to her work. It's just really good what she's done with like each like I'm trying to. It was about a month ago since I've read it, so like one story might be about like a mother and son who live on one side of the Thames and they have to cross over to the other side to do their shopping. And this would be back in like the 1700s or the 1800s. Some of them were, I don't think I have the book here to look, but it went back hundreds of years.
Hmm.
And it would just be about their walk across the frozen Thames when it's not quite frozen or when it was melting that day. And she's thinking that how her husband just told her that maybe today isn't the best day to go, but she needed to get new boots for her son. And then she's watching like the water puddle around her feet with every step that she takes. Like it's just, she makes those little vignettes, and each it's a small book. Each story is maybe only like 2, 3, 4 pages. What Humphreys does in such a short amount of space, literally, she's fantastic. I love this book.
Yeah, yeah, that one sounds good. I definitely would like to read that one. That one actually is on my list.
Yeah.
So, wow. My next book is, again, my 12 classic women authors. My Brilliant Career by Miles Franklin, and Miles Franklin is a pseudonym. Although I think it's part of her name. I think she's had like a really long name, and I think those were parts of her name. But so this was a movie I saw back in the late 70s, early 80s, My Brilliant Career, and it starred Judy Davis and Sam Neill. So it's kind of, for those of us who know it, it's really famous and it was iconic at the time. And I just loved it. At the time, I did not know it was a book. And I think at the end of the movie, maybe they do tell you that or something. But anyway, it never dawned on me to read it because always the book is better. And so then you kind of go like, now it can mess up the experience you had with the movie. And I love the movie so much. But I have to tell you, the book was better than the movie, and both are fantastic. So it's a story of Sibylla, and she is living with her family in this very hard scrabble life, and it's early 20th century. And she basically, I mean, and that's one of the things they say about the book, why it's sort of this classic in Australia, is because it really showed what life was like at that time in Australia. And it is semi-autobiographical, so it really kind of did happen to the author in many of the situations that play out. And she goes to live with her grandmother, and she has a different experience there. She has a love interest, but is it a love interest? You just kind of, it's just this really sort of quiet story about this young woman and what she wants out of her life. And it's absolutely brilliant. And I had some people, when I posted it to Instagram, who said they remembered the movie, they loved the movie as well. And some people who, I don't think anyone had read it, but I think some people said they wanted to read it. So I just want to recommend it because the description of even the environment, and that movie was my first introduction to Australia and what the sort of outback would look like, and I will just never forget that, and then to read it in a story where it's very descriptive and you get that sense of what it's like when they're riding, in a horse-drawn whatever and the dust is kicking up or whatever. It's just really an amazing story. And then, of course, I had to do my little rabbit hole searching where I looked into her life, and she had quite an interesting life herself and never really had the same success. And she wrote this book when she was very young, and she never quite had the same success as she did with that first novel that she wrote. So highly recommend.
She's Australian also?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm seeing it. I think you're doing a great job as we near the end of 2024, like of your goal of the 12 classic women writers. But also, there's a trend towards Australian writers.
Yeah, it is funny because I think 3 have been Australian, I think. But I think it's because partly these movies that were so important to me when I was growing up, when I was young, that there was that real wave of Australian cinema that came through into the United States and around the world, actually. And those movies were books first. So then when I started looking into classic authors, a lot of these titles were kind of popping up and I went, "Oh, okay." And actually there are more on my list of things I saw like on PBS. There was a book by Vera Brittain. It was a memoir of hers about World War One, and Vera Brittain was the main character, and anyway, that was a PBS series. So I always wanted to read that book. I never did. And I loved the series. So a lot of it started out, those were visual memories for me, but
Mm,
then it turns out, oh my God, they were books. So
yeah,
it's like, now I want to read the real story because again, the books are, in my opinion, books are always better than the
yeah,
movies.
very cool. Okay, my next book, I'm going nonfiction, a memoir as well. This was released in 2023, and it is My Body is Distant by Paige Maylott, who is a local author, local Canadian author. She lives actually, I think, just like in Hamilton, just down the street
Oh,
from me.
hmm.
I flipping loved this memoir so much. It was on my radar for a few months, and then I can't remember what just really pushed it, that I was like, I must get this from the library. But whatever happened, it did. And I'm so glad that I did. So, Paige is a trans woman. And this book covers, in the book, she flips back and forth because she leads a digital life and her real life. In both, she is exploring her sexuality and gender. The digital life allows her to be more free with her gender expression and her sexuality. And through it, in her digital life, she actually finds love and romance. It's really beautiful. And then at the same time, in real life, she's coming to terms with a cancer diagnosis. Her marriage is imploding. She's coming to terms with her sexuality and being trans. When she makes the transition, she speaks very honestly the whole way through the book. But the discrimination she gets from her job, from her employers, who she's known, like she's worked for them, I years, and had said that at the time they considered her like a member of their family. But once she transitions, she's a member of their family that they can easily find a way to fire her. It's
Wow.
just very, yeah. So it's difficult to read at times because Paige is very straightforward and honest with what happens, what's going on in her life. But it's such a beautiful story. And I loved having her digital life in there. Is just something I've never seen in a book or read in a book. Like, and something I know nothing about either. Like I don't play video games. I don't have like a virtual or virtual life, a digital life kind of thing. So I found it very interesting. But how she could superimpose the two of them in her writing was beautiful.
So what does okay, so explain to me so that I better understand what a digital life is in compared to her real life. I mean, do they blend together in some way or are they very distinctly different?
Very distinctly different. So at a time before she had transitioned, she could go into, I can't remember the name of the game, but they're almost like chat rooms, right? Where you could then be anyone. So she could be a woman, like full on. I think she took like a bunny character, but a very feminine bunny character. And people could just they could just meet each other, like you could just, like, she had friends that they would go to bars in this digital life and just
Oh.
hang out, and then other people would come into the chat room, and so you could like remove yourself into just another little separate chat room and just talk. You could like virtually on screen you saw yourself as you wanted to be seen, like, so I would be a cat. I'm just taking pulling that out of the top of my head because why not? I would totally be a
Mhm.
cat if I could. And like the person you're talking to could be a lion. You know what I mean? And then that's how
Yeah.
you see. And these games are so well programmed that you can have sex. Like, your
Oh, yeah.
characters are having sex right there. I know nothing about this, so I'm just making it very basic because that's what I know. You know, I know what I've read, kind of thing. But people can be themselves so much, although sometimes how can you be truly yourself if you have no outward impediments or pressures and stuff like this? But you get to know a person just in this little environment, right?
Yeah, so it sounds like you could be more of just really who you are
Yeah.
without all the societal expectations that are placed on us, right?
Yes.
By who we are, what we how what we look like, how we
Yeah.
identify, etcetera.
And
Yeah.
your voice, you can modify your voice and stuff like this. So, she could be truly who she wanted to be
Mhm.
in her virtual life that at the time in real life she could not be.
Wow, that sounds so interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's gritty. It's very honest. Like I said, it's difficult to read sometimes, and her transition, she's very honest about the transition, the physical process of it, which it's hard to read about her being in such pain after the surgeries, but knowing what emotional and mental pain she was in before the surgeries, it's,
Yeah.
like, bless her for writing this book and putting it out there because I think it's a book that a lot of us should read
Mhm.
right now. Just, the whole empathy and getting other people's stories. It's a thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say for all of us to develop more compassion and empathy
Mhm.
and understanding. That sounds really amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that one,
Yeah.
gosh.
I know. I can't wait to see what else she writes in the
Mhm.
future.
My next book is Skid Dogs by Emelia, and I'm not sure if it's Symington-Fedy, I'm not really sure, but okay, this book blew my mind. I picked it up, I was at my favorite independent bookstore in Sarnia, the bookkeeper. I was just browsing and thought, "Oh, I think I'm gonna buy a book today," and I picked this one up, and it is I don't know if it's not really a memoir. I don't even know what the category is, but anyway, so it's about this author Emelia, and she grew up in this small town in BC, and she's an adult now, but she goes back because there was a murder in this small town, in a place along the railroad tracks that had been this place where kids in this small town they sort of lived off the railroad tracks. They would go up onto the tracks, they would hang out, they might smoke pot, play, drink whatever, play music, whatever. They just lived their lives along this way. And it was like a shortcut across town. So rather than go all the way around, they would just go along the railroad tracks, etc. So when she was a teenage girl, she and her friends, that's what they did. Well, then this young woman is murdered and it changes the whole nature of the town, their view of their safety, this iconic place. And so she decides she wants to do a radio thing for BBC or CBC, I mean, and she's going to interview people or whatever. Anyway, so it's about her kind of going back. So there's this, her telling the story of what it was like when she was a teenager, and then this current story of her going back, and she had this sort of relationship with her mother that was kind of contentious. And I'm telling it really poorly, but let me just tell you, this book blew my mind because reading about what the lives of teenage girls 20 some years ago, and then just assuming that it's gotten worse, to be quite frank, right? With the advent of social media and all the crazy stuff that goes on there. It was so painful to read her experience as a girl and what those other girls experienced as well, trying to navigate girlhood and growing up and relationships and everything. I was just really kind of horrified by it all, and not in a judgmental way, but just like, oh my God, what girls go through in our society is just, it's hard. It's just really hard.
Mhm.
So I just want to suggest that when you're reading it, maybe you won't be as affected as I was reading it, but it's an amazing story. She ended up making some kind of a radio documentary for CBC. I couldn't access it, but perhaps you can in Canada. But I loved everything about this book. And she doesn't, I mean, I will say this, she is not in many ways a sympathetic character, because she made some mistakes in her life. And in some of it, I just sort of think, wow, she told on herself in many ways. And it is also a very gritty story, very gritty story. But I highly recommend it. And she does double back and sort of tell the story what ultimately happened with this young girl, because at the beginning you don't know, and that was part of it. They didn't know who killed her, and so everybody in town was locked down. Like, they literally were saying, stay behind your doors, lock your doors, da da da. Eventually they find out who did it, and there's a resolution there. But anyway, really, really compelling nonfiction, and something I didn't expect. I expected sort of one thing, and I got so much more out of it than I thought I would. So I really, really loved it.
That's on my TBR. I think I'm going to jump it up a little bit. I want to read it sooner than where it is.
Yeah, I think you'll really enjoy it. I mean, enjoying it is kind of a weird thing, because it's a little bit sometimes a hard read, but it's
Mhm.
very, very worthwhile read.
I've said it before. I don't know how people, writers who do memoir, I don't know how they do it.
I don't either.
So, like, slice themselves open and share themselves. I know I couldn't. I just know I couldn't. I think that's what makes me appreciate a memoir, like a good memoir, so much, that they are willing to share every little aspect of their lives.
Yeah, I always wonder, because we've read so many really gritty, heartbreaking memoirs, and I always think, and you can never say this to a person, but I want to ask them, in retrospect, like, how did it feel once it was out in the world and people were reading it, and then maybe being interviewed and being asked really hard questions? Like, how do you manage that? Because I guess it's one thing to sit in your room and write it out, and maybe it's cathartic in some
Yeah.
way, but then you put it out in the world, and then now everybody knows it, and now they're asking you questions about it. Like, how hard is it? Did the expectation of how it would be put out in the world, was it harder than they thought it would be? Or, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, that part blows my mind. Ugh,
I'm so grateful for them. But yeah.
I totally agree.
So my next book is a fiction. But while I was reading it, I kept thinking that I was actually reading a memoir, like nonfiction. It kept messing with me in the best way possible. And this one is The Memoirs of Miss Chief Eagle Testickle, number one. There's a full title, and I can't remember it, like a colon. Let me just quickly get it. Oh, a true and exact accounting of the history of Turtle Island, number one, by Gisele Gordon and Kent Monkman. So I've been an admirer of Kent Monkman's artwork for maybe a couple of years. I think he really came onto my radar like 2, 3 years ago. So when this book was published, I jumped on it, but it took me a few months to get around to reading it. So yes, so Miss Chief Eagle Testickle is essentially his is Kent Monkman's drag persona, And his paintings, if you are not familiar with them, please go Google his name now. They are stunning. If you ever get a chance to see one in real life, which I was lucky to do twice, because the Royal Ontario Museum last year, 2 years ago, had a exhibit of his, which was, you got to see it too, did you,
Mm-hmm.
Rebecca?
Yeah.
Right? Which was amazing. But prior to that, on a previous trip to New Brunswick and Fredericton, my family and I, we just popped into like a little art gallery that was there, and they happened to have one, and that was the first one I saw, and it's like a master. And I am not just like, it's
Yeah.
not a hot take. Everyone knows he's amazing. So he essentially, his paintings are like snippets of Canadian history, but obviously with the Indigenous viewpoint, humor. They're amazing. They're heartbreaking. They're everything. They're just an experience. And this book he co-wrote with his friend Gisele Gordon. I think they've done other things together, films and stuff like this. And it is the history of Turtle Island of Canada, but through Miss Chief Eagle Testicle's eyes, her point of view as she walks through Canadian history. And I at times would forget that it's so written from her viewpoint that in my head she's a real person and I'm getting her story as she's interacting with all of these historical Canadian figures.
Okay, because now I'm totally not sure what this is. Is it a fictional telling? I mean, it's like based on Canadian history, but it's fictional
Yes.
telling? Okay.
Yes. So it's fictional because it's her story. Like, she's telling it to you,
Mhm.
but everything that's happened is history. So you will, like, there's a huge there's lots of notes. So there's lots of little footnotes to each chapter and stuff. So as you're reading something, there'll be a footnote. So you go to that footnote and that's where they deep dive into the different aspects of more detail of that historical period. But you're getting her interacting with, oh my gosh, I can't think of some prime ministers from Canadian history.
Mhm.
It's very sexual and funny because Miss Chief Eagle Testicles is a sexual being. She is beautiful and stunning,
Yeah.
and she has sex with every creature, every person she meets. She's amazing. Like, I'm showing Rebecca the cover, please. Like,
Oh, yeah.
just, oh, she's like on a
Oh, yeah.
stallion with this blonde man who's only half dressed. Oh, she's like stunning.
And I can't
So
see, but does she have her stilettos on? Because I know she
yes,
always
she
wears,
does.
yeah.
She does.
It's an experience, like you said, right?
It's an experience because in
Yeah.
addition to that, you are also getting, oh, there's like his paintings are all throughout the book. I love it because I do now have like a piece of his artwork in my hands. His paintings are all
Oh,
throughout the book.
yeah.
They're amazing. There's lots of Cree language written into it. So there's a glossary and he uses Cree words throughout it, which I really like because I started to try learning some of them, becoming more familiar with them. I didn't do a
Mhm.
very good job, but it's part of the experience of reading the book too. Anyways,
Yeah.
I loved it and I can't wait to pick up a volume 2 and have her continue telling me her story.
Yeah. My next book is The Silent Boy by Lois Lowry, and it was actually published, I think it was published in 2000 or something. But I don't know who I was talking to, somebody online. Yeah, it was published in 2003. I was talking to somebody online and I just mentioned that what was really cool about this book, I was reminded of it, is that so you'll see the picture. I'm showing it to Tara, but each chapter opens with a picture of someone. And what happened was Lois Lowry, who wrote The Giver, she's most famous for The Giver, I think, and she had gotten photographs from family and friends and even antique stores. And she wove a story. Is that the proper tense of it? Wove a story of these characters. And so the Silent Boy the story happens in about 1908. And Katie is the main character, and her father is she's a young girl. Her father is a doctor, and the silent boy, and now I've got to remember what his name is, Jacob, and he has autism. But of course, back then they would not have known what that is. But he was this boy who didn't go to school. He was kind of like a horse whisperer type of character, and it's really about a thing that happens with this boy. But what I loved about the story was, like I said, taking all these pictures, weaving together the narrative. So each chapter at the beginning, it would have a picture of something, and then she would just create this story. And it's a really beautiful story. It kind of reminds me of, well, I don't want to say because I don't want to give anything away. So I'm not going to tell you what it reminds me of. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. Anyway, it's a children's book. But it is, I think an adult would read it, which I did 20 years ago and loved it. I read it again just because I was so reminded of it. And I tried to get it from my library and it wasn't available. So it wasn't one of her big popular books, but I did go online and got this book through Abe Books, ABE Books, which sells old books and hard to get books. And I just really loved it. And I think even though it was written 20 years ago, I think Lowry does this really beautiful way of telling a story about this boy who has autism in a way that wasn't necessarily expected 20 years ago, because our knowledge base has grown so much about the situation with children and people on the spectrum. So I just think she did a really beautiful, compassionate way of telling the story about this boy, and it's really good. And it's funny too, because I remember when we got the book in the library. I was a children's librarian at the time, and I wasn't sure whether it belonged in the juvenile section, which is generally fourth to sixth grade kind of, or whether it belonged in the YA section. And reading it again 20 years later, I'm still conflicted about where I think it belongs, because she brings in historical things that had happened, like the Shirtwaist Triangle factory fire where the girls jumped out of the building to try to save their lives, and that horrible thing that happened in New York. And she brings in all these things, and I kept thinking, gosh, if I were like, I have little kids in my family now that are of that age group, and I'm thinking, I don't know, if they read it, would they be scared? Would they understand what's going on? But then how many young adults would read a book about a younger character? So I'm still not sure where I think this book fits, and that may be why it no longer sits on a library shelf, maybe. But please read it. It's a beautiful story. Lois Lowry is just a I mean, I can't even think of adjectives to describe her, but we all know how wonderful and great she is. So she takes this story and she runs with it in a really wonderful way that I think, at least as an adult, I loved it. Not sure where it fits for kids. Still.
Interesting. Okay, my next book is a collection of essays. I Don't Do Disability and Other Lies I've Told Myself by Adelle Purdham, published very recently, like within the last month or so, I believe. I can't give you a publication date, but very recently, I can tell you this. So I had received a copy from a friend of the podcast, Holliday of River Street Writing, and art poet, memoirist, like,
Everything.
we talked about Holliday before. And what drew me to this is so I've mentioned before, I'm in my 50s. So I grew up in Newfoundland in the 70s when disabilities were kept invisible. Like, like everything was separate. So like the children in our school who had any kind of disabilities were in a separate classroom. Like it was the time. And I think that's only fairly recently that it started to change. I feel like that people are not kept separate from the general population kind of thing, right? So as a result of this, I've come to realize over the last couple of years that I have this ableism that I work towards getting over. I don't even know if that's the right terminology, but I'm just it's you hate to admit something like this, but I'm being honest, people. Like, I know I have this ableism, and I trying to, do what I can to get over it, to like open myself up kind of thing. So that's what drew me to this book originally. This a collection of essays. Adelle herself, her middle child, her middle daughter has Down syndrome. So that's kind of like the jumping off point for this collection of essays is, as a mother, what happened to her, how she felt when she found out that her child had Down syndrome, and her facing her own a lifetime of ableism as you're now going to be parenting a person with a disability. But the collection is so much more than that, because you also get her life prior to being a mother. So being a single woman, being a university student, becoming a mother of two, becoming a mother of three, a writer. You get her whole creative life she talks about. It's just, I loved this collection. I was so happy I read it for like so many reasons. It's a fantastic collection.
Yeah. And I think those of us of a certain age, that's the experience we had, where children with disabilities went into different classrooms, et cetera, and there wasn't a lot of interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot of us are carrying that. We're all carrying that to some degree because that was our life experience.
Yeah.
And that's why, books like this are so critically important. And that, I just keep thinking about, these statistics where they say, like, a lot of people just read like one book a year or whatever. And I just keep thinking how much better the world would be if we would all read more
Yes.
and be exposed to a different point of view, different from our own, and then learn and be better. God, wouldn't that be a great world?
Yeah. It would be. I mean, I think it's becoming a better world. I know it's not the
Hmm.
best world at the moment, and that we have our own issues. But, you know, when I think about my elementary school in the 70s, so when I was in elementary school in the 70s, and I think about it now, like, like in our school when my kids went to elementary school, there were children with Down syndrome. There were children that had two moms. Like it was, and it was just the way it was. Like
Yep.
my kids knew nothing
Right.
other than the way it was at that moment, which was beautiful. Like that I could see already them having a different world experience than I had, and that it was going to be a better one in that sense.
Yeah. All right. My next book is, let's see. Oh, I won't talk that long on this one. I read The Pearl by John Steinbeck. I always made a lot of jokes about dead white males. I haven't read a lot of them. And I buddy read this with our friend Jen. And it's a Mexican folk tale, based on a Mexican folk tale about a couple who are living a hardscrabble life, and in Mexico, and he's a pearl diver, and his son gets stung by a scorpion, and he just wants to have him treated by a doctor. And so he ends up finding the pearl of the world, and he now wants to be able to sell that pearl to take care of his child. And that's all I'll say about it. If you haven't read it, it's actually really a good story. We did a deep dive into it. It was fun. And I still have a perspective that is not quite the norm, but I'm sticking with my philosophy about what I think Steinbeck was trying to say about that book. But I might be the only human being who thinks that, and that's okay, because everybody gets something different out of a story. But I have had fun reading some of the classics, and I will try to read more Steinbeck, since I've only read one. No, I actually read of Mice and Men when I was in high school, like everybody probably did.
Yeah.
But I did enjoy it, so highly recommend The Pearl. So,
Yeah.
yes.
I read The Pearl in high school and it broke me. That book
Yeah.
broke me.
Well, and it was hilarious because I will just say this. We get to the end of the book, and Jen and I just text each other like our comments or whatever. And then she just said, "What? What are we supposed to take away from this?" And I kind of laughed and gave her my pessimistic view of what I thought the ending was, which was hilarious. And so, and maybe that's why some of these classics resonate with me, because they all sort of have a pessimism to them. And maybe that's just who I am. And I can see that in those stories. But I will say, it's definitely worth a read. But yeah, it's a short, it's like, I think 100 and maybe 190 pages. I can't remember how many pages, but it's not that long, and it was a lot of fun to read. So
Good.
together with someone.
I was going to say, I find it hilarious that you're saying it's a lot of fun to read. And I'm like, that book broke me, Rebecca.
No, but it's yeah. But like I said, when you're reading it with somebody else, because I think if I had read it, I would have been like, whatever. But when you read it with somebody else and then they force you to think about things a different way and you go, shit, I never thought of it that way. Then it's actually, I think that's fun to get more out of it, because otherwise I would just be reading dead white males and I would be like, whatever. Right. So yes, but it is an ending that, yes.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's not a Christmas story. It's not a Christmas story. Let's put it that way.
I won't be reading it this holiday season.
But you know how ridiculous I am? One year for Christmas, my gift to myself was I read The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. And I would tell people that, oh my God, it's about this family, this immigrant family in Chicago. Or I think it's Chicago. Anyway, where they slaughter animals. You know, they work in the place where they slaughter animals, and a hard life and everything. And it's a really depressing story about this family. And when I told people what I was doing for Christmas, they all looked at me like I was a complete whack job. And so those are my kind of Christmas stories. But anyway, so.
Oh, Rebecca.
I know. What can I tell you?
I got to get you reading Winter Solstice next Christmas. That's my goal. That's going to be one of my reading goals for 2025.
There you go. Get me to read a happy story. Yes.
Okay. My last book, I'm going to take a complete turn from all the other books I've brought today. And I'm bringing you All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby. So published in, I think, 2023. S.A. Cosby is an American author. I'm not quite sure where he's from, but anyway, so this is like a thriller, mystery, cop procedural. Not really, maybe, because I don't read a lot of them, but only because the main character, Titus Crown, is the black sheriff of a small town in Virginia, and there is a murder. And so what happens right at the beginning, this is not a spoiler, but right at the beginning, there is a school shooting, and the most popular white teacher in the school is shot by a former student, a young black man, and who then is shot by the police. So that comes off right at the beginning, first couple chapters. But that shooting then leads Titus, our hero, into because something doesn't ring right to this shooting, and we get Titus finds out something about the history, the background of the teacher that just kind of blows everything up. And there's a serial killer, and Titus is on the path to trying to find that serial killer. So that's the main gist of it. The school shooting, we find out there's a serial killer, and Titus must find that serial killer before other people, or more people do die, by the way, not just those first two people. But at the same time, Titus is a black man in a small town in Virginia. So that there is history, and Titus takes no shit. I love Titus. So at the same time that he is investigating this and trying to catch a serial killer, he is also having to deal with a group of a white men who don't want their statues being taken down, and there's protests going on, and it's so good. I loved this book. I loved it.
Now, is this going to be a series, or is it a series?
I do not believe it's a series. It's not Cosby's first book. He does have other books, and they're on my list as well. And I think they're all standalones. And the way that this one ends, it could be a standalone. I think it'd be just fine by a standalone. It could also be a series, but I think it's just a standalone. But all at the same time, I would love to have more of Titus's story. But yeah, it's compulsive. Oh, it's got a great secondary cast of characters, like Titus's family, the other townspeople. Yeah, all the social issues. Oh yes, yeah, the lack of acknowledgement of history while glorifying Confederacy. Yeah, it's just a great book. Great book. Yeah, and I want to read more of his stuff.
I think I'm going to recommend that one to my mom as well, because I think if it's on audio, which I assume it is, I think she would like that.
I would be surprised if it isn't because I think he's quite popular. Yeah. They're gory. Sometimes it's a little graphic, the violence and the methods of killing.
Okay, I'll have to run that past her and see if she
Run
would, because I
and
have to. Go ahead.
oh, sorry. And yeah, the like the serial killer that he's trying to catch is a serial killer of children. I should put that out there. So
Oh,
like for
okay.
trigger warnings for people. Yeah. So it's dark. It's dark.
Yeah, I'll have to run that past her, but it's so funny because sometimes I hear her, she's playing because she has turned sound up pretty high now, but it's hilarious because I'll hear her listening to some romance book and they're using the F word and they're saying all kinds of outrageous stuff. And I'm sitting there thinking, my 88-year-old mother's in there just listening to her romance stories. And it makes me laugh every time I hear it. So I've never told her that. She'll never know I said it, but it does make me laugh when I walk by and I hear it.
Okay, that's it for me.
My next book is Passing by Nella Larsen, which was published, oh gosh, I think in the 1920s. And this is one of my classic authors. So for my goal. And apparently, I didn't know this, but a few years ago, it was a Netflix film directed by Rebecca Hall. And I didn't know that. So yeah, it was news to me. But it's basically a story about a woman who is all the main characters are African American, but some are of mixed race and some look white. And so one of the main characters, and what is her name? Claire, she is passing. So she's married a white man. She is passing. He does not know she is black. He just thinks she's a white woman. And then the main character is Irene, and she and Claire had gone to school together and they meet up again as adults. And so Irene is a light-skinned black woman who could pass but doesn't. And then she's married to a black man. And then she meets up with her friend Claire and gets to hear more about her life as a woman who's passing. Now I will tell you, and this is all I'll say about it. I loved this book. I thought it was fascinating. I kind of would like to see the film, although I'm pretty sure, again, the book will be better. But this book reminds me of an episode from Sex and the City. And that's all I'll say. And if you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't read it yet, but you read it and you know Sex and the City, you will come back and tell me, yes, I totally agree. This reminds me of an episode from that. So, love the
I
book. It
was
was really
not
fun.
I was not expecting that comparison.
Have you seen the movie, or you haven't read the book, have you?
The book is on my list.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that there was a movie. And I've not
Yeah.
watched Sex in the City either. So
Oh, okay. Well, then you won't. Yeah.
it won't lie for me then. Okay.
Yeah. And I won't tell you until after once you've read the book, let me know. Well, I'll
Yeah.
know when you've read it. And then I'll tell you what the episode was because
Yeah.
as I was reading it, I just could picture that episode, which is funny because I actually just saw that episode because I do watch reruns of Sex and the City sometimes. And I did see that episode within the last month or so. So that's why it was really front and center in my mind. But I really liked this book. And again, I just have to say, I read The Street by Ann Petrie, which was also written in the 20s, I think. These Black women authors writing stories, telling the truth of what life was like back then. I can't believe they got their books published, and I can't believe they were popular, and that, you know what I'm saying? Like, it just completely blows my mind because what powerful women they were to tell these stories at a time when, Jesus, I mean, it was the 1920s when they were telling these stories.
Yeah.
And, the world was really, really different for African Americans and especially for African American women. So the courage and the artistry of these women just completely blows my mind. I loved
Yeah.
it.
I think that speaks to that people want these stories, that regardless of what other people and other groups are saying,
Hmm.
people want other people's stories. And they
Totally.
can do whatever the hell they want.
Yeah,
There's not going to be any way to stop these stories getting out there because people want.
exactly. Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it because obviously at the time, people wanted to hear these stories. And thank God the publisher, because the only reason I say that is because publishers are just kind of, I don't know, especially in the US, I can't speak for Canada, but in the US, I read about so many comments that that authors have made about publishing in the United States and how hard it is to get things published, et cetera. So maybe it wasn't, I'm not going to say easier back in the day, but maybe they were more amenable to, I don't know. I don't know enough about the publishing world, but anyway, I agree with you though. People want these stories. So
Yeah.
I highly recommend passing. Now you don't have anything left, right?
No,
I have one
I'm
more.
done. You're going to finish us up.
Okay, so I read Recollections of My Nonexistence, a memoir by Rebecca Solnit. It is a book I picked up because she is about my age, a couple of years younger, and lived in the Bay Area, lived in San Francisco. That's really her identity of living in that city and experiencing everything that she did. And so I picked it up thinking like, oh, and she's a feminist. So I thought, oh, I think there's a lot here that is, resonates with me. And I will say there were parts of the memoir that I loved and was so it just feeling like I've not heard anyone say it this way. She's amazing. Love it, love it, love it. Then there were parts of the story that I was like, I'm not that crazy about it. I will continue to read her. I'm now following her on Blue Sky. I have a Blue Sky account, so I'm now following her there. So pretty much every day I get to read her words. And so that makes me happy. And I was talking to other people who have read her and who said the same thing, that like they're kind of up and down. Like she's times that she's just brilliant, and then other times when it's just kind of like, whatever. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
now I feel a little validated that I sort of had that same experience reading her. But I will say the parts that I loved just felt like an epiphany. I just thought, I'm so glad somebody is saying these things about feminism and women's experience. And she talks a lot about, being in San Francisco in the 80s by herself as a 17-year-old because she left home early, and how she wasn't physically safe. And just that whole experience of women who have had, young women and women of all ages really, who have had to tailor their lives out of concern for their own safety. And it's something that we all continue to live with. And it's not right and it's not fair that, we need men to protect ourselves from other men. I don't get that. That's like something fucked up in the world. Sorry, I'm going to say it. So I would recommend it with that caveat that I loved parts of it and other parts were just okay. So that's what I have. So I got a lot of reading in.
You did get a lot of reading in this past month.
Yeah.
Awesome. And until next time, happy reading. Thank you for joining us on our bookish journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing Canada Reads American Style wherever you listen. You can connect with the podcast and Rebecca on Instagram at Canada Reads American Style, and with Tara at On a Branch Reads. Until next time, keep reading.